Well, we had one individual come through that check stop. She had about 20 bottles.
Tonight, going too far? Every vehicle coming into Norway House Cree Nation now has to go through a check stop.
For a lot of these girls, it's the first time they've left maybe their community or they've left the Thunder Bay area.
It's their first Pee Wee hockey tournament and their first visit to the big city. We meet the girls from Fort Hope First Nation as they compete in Ottawa. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. One Cree community in Manitoba is taking unprecedented measures to combat the use of drugs and alcohol in the First Nation. Last month, Norway House Cree Nation set up a check stop, which is believed to be the first of its kind in the province. But as Brittany Hobson shows us, the decision has left a community divided.
A month ago, Norway House set up this check stop to curb the amount of drugs and alcohol coming into the community. The officers search every vehicle coming in.
Well, we had one individual come through that check stop. She had about 20 bottles.
Fred Keem is one of the officers who works the check stop. The 5-member team mans it 24/7. They are required to confiscate any drugs, alcohol, or weapons found. Something that's not always easy when it involves people in the community.
It's kind of tough too when you have members from your own community trying to come through here and saying, you can't search me because I'm from home. And I say, well, you have to go through it, or we might have to send you back or keep you here till RCMP show up to do a search on you.
Approximately 6,000 people live in Norway House, and the check stop has left much of the community divided.
I think it's a bad idea because it doesn't even work.
What do you mean by that it doesn't work?
Like, there's still stuff around, like alcohol in the community.
I feel more secure at home. I feel there's no drugs coming in, alcohol. It's a matter of being safe in the community for all the people.
There have been approximately 20 seizures since the stop went up, with most of them being alcohol.
Lately, we haven't been finding the drugs, so I wish we had a canine or something to help us.
While some are pushing for safety in the community, others are concerned the stop violates human rights. Norway House Chief Larson Anderson says that's something security officers are working on.
There were discussions with the RCMP and with legal counsel on how far they could go. It is a learning experience, and it's going to take some time for the check stop staff to be able to learn or to be able to follow those teachings that they've been given.
The decision to set up the checkpoint was made by previous chief and council. At the beginning of March, Anderson was voted in as new chief. He has his own concerns about cost, but recognizes the stop helps in more ways than one.
We do realize it does employ our people, and we don't want to lose that employment. But I do think and strongly believe that the province needs to come in as a partner, which they should have initially.
The stop cost $600,000 to set up and will take another $500,000 to keep it running each year. Larson says council will give it a few months to see if it's worth the price tag. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Norway House Cree Nation.
It was a grim anniversary for Delaine Copeness's family. Holly Moore has that story from Kenora, Ontario.
2 years after Delaine Copeness's body was found, her mother Anita Ross held this Justice for Delaine rally in Kenora, Ontario. Dozens of people showed up at the Knox United Church on Friday to remember her. The 16-year-old went missing after an outing with friends on February 28, 2016. She was found almost a month later in Lake of the Woods by this dock. Anita recalls the day police told her they had found her daughter.
I remember him leaning down, and then he grabbed my hand and he told me it was Delaine.
According to the Ontario coroner, Delaine drowned. They found no evidence of foul play. But that doesn't sit well with Anita.
I put my life on it that she was with somebody. Somebody knows. There's an individual out there that knows how she got in that water. Why was there bruises on her? Fresh bruises. These weren't days old bruises. They were like freshly bruised. Even 2 years, I still don't have complete answers. But I know my daughter was not alone when she died. Somebody knows.
Holly Moore, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Yukon's group homes will be getting a systemic review to see if children and youth are getting the support they need as wards of the state. Shirley McLean reports.
These roads, you're talking about Article 19 at this point.
Yukon's child advocate has a big job on her hands to review the systemic issues plaguing Yukon's group homes.
We have many advocacy issues for children who live in group homes. I think probably every group home is represented in our office in some way, shape, or form. The advocacy issues are not simple.
Thank you. Annette King says she can't speak to specific complaints or issues raised by children and youth in the Territory's 6 group homes, but says her office is busy.
So this child, there's systemic issues around mental health, education, overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in the child welfare system, family supports, so that children can stay home and not have to live in out-of-home care.
Recent complaints from former group home kids about being physically assaulted by workers have prompted the government to ask for an independent review.
Studio time. Are you ready to do this?
There's a lot of flaws in the system when it comes to actually growing up.
As a teenager, Carrie Sweeney spent 6 months in a group home. Now, in her early 20s, she works with youth at a local youth center in Whitehorse. She says there needs to be a connection between the kids and the group home workers.
I remember a lot of the boys receiving homes. I heard stories about them getting violent just because, like, what are you going to do when a kid wants to leave but they're not supposed to? It's either a miscommunication of they do care or just the power struggle.
Sweeney says the review is needed and suggests the government make the group home environment more like a home and not a business.
You know, they're all good kids. They're just a little, like, they need to be taught coping mechanisms because they've all been through a lot. Therapy or, you know, like sports, something to, so they have a positive way to get out that energy. These kids need a place to feel safe where they won't know stability for the rest of their life.
Child Youth Advocate Office, Annette speaking.
The advocate will collect information by speaking to kids in care, their families, review old case files, and speak with group home workers as well. There is no date yet to when the review will be finished and recommendations presented to the Yukon government. Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
To Ottawa now, where Bill C-69 came under fire from the opposition today. One of its provisions is to allow Indigenous communities to assess the impact of new energy and mining projects, but only if they're small enough not to warrant a federal review panel. And Green Party leader Elizabeth May said during a press conference that review panels are flawed, that energy regulators will contaminate the process.
The Act actually says if you're reviewing a pipeline, members of the panel that do the review must come from the National Energy Board, now renamed the Canadian Energy Regulator. And if you're reviewing offshore drilling in Atlantic Canada, members of the panel that study it have to come from these offshore boards or from a nuclear facility from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. This means the captive regulators are in charge of the reviews, and that is unacceptable, and that is duplicitous.
Tuesday saw the release of Quebec's 2018 budget. With the fall election looming, the province is opening the coffers. Aside from investing in health and education, the Liberal government is spending over $90 million on gender equality. They say portions will go to combating domestic abuse in Indigenous communities. They're also making long-term commitments to improve housing for Inuit, as well as building a rehabilitation center in northern Quebec.
Partie importante des ressources allouées à l'accès aux habitations abordables sera affectée à l'aide au logement pour la région du Nunavik. De plus, le gouvernement apporte une aide supplémentaire de 48 millions de dollars aux communautés autochtones d'ici 2022-2023 afin de leur assurer de meilleures conditions de vie.
The Federal Minister of Indigenous Services is in Winnipeg making a number of announcements. She joins us in studio after the break. Here's a look at Wednesday's weather forecast, starting on a rainy east coast. 6 above in St. John's, +5 in Charlottetown, cloudy and +6 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, sunny skies and +5 in Cartwright, +6 in Chibougamau, Quebec City and Montreal. Warmer in southern Ontario, +9 in Windsor and London, a sunny 12 above in Peterborough, +8 under the sun in Timmins and Kapuskasing, -6 with snow in Big Trout Lake. In Manitoba, -19 in Churchill, -4 in Winnipeg and Barons River, where snow is likely. In Saskatchewan, -5 in Regina and Saskatoon. Much cooler to the north, sunny and -22 in Stony Rapids and Uranium City. Welcome back. For decades, it's been called an epidemic. Suicides in Indigenous communities. Yet we actually don't know the exact number of how many have died. APTN Investigates reporter Martha Troyan searched for those answers. She joined us earlier in studio to talk about what she found. Martha, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us more about what you found in your research?
So when I started this project, I sent a media inquiry to Health Canada and to Indigenous Affairs, and I asked them how many suicides took place within the last 5 years to do with Indigenous people across the country. And I was told that it wasn't their jurisdictional responsibility and I would have to contact all provinces and territories for this information. So I did that, and I found out basically that there are some provinces that don't have this data. They're not recording any information whatsoever when it comes to the number of suicide deaths of Indigenous people. And there are some provinces that will record this data only if they can verify the ethnicity. Some of the provinces record by province, by region, for instance. And so basically what I found is that, and that also applies with coroner's offices too. If they know that they can verify an individual is Indigenous at the time of the death, they will record it. But for some of the offices, they're not mandated to record this information. So that's basically what I found so far.
Was there a specific area that you were most intrigued about when you were looking into these numbers?
Well, I think, so what I found is I was working with Anishinaabe Cree Nation. It's a political organization based in Thunder Bay, and they oversee 49 communities in the north. And they gave me some data, and they've been doing their own recording, for instance, regarding these deaths. And they've noted 562 suicide deaths since 1986. And of those deaths, 334 were males. And almost half of those deaths were those of 218 young people between the ages of 15 and 24. Or no, it was 15 and 20 years old. Sorry about that. And the other thing that was interesting about their data was that, almost 100 of these suicide deaths were children. So they were between the ages of 10 to 14 years old.
So NAN's keeping track, but are there other things that need to be changed in the data collection here?
Well, what I found interesting is that, even though Health Canada is telling me that they don't keep track of this data, so then they tell me to go contact these provinces and territories, and I do that, and then I'm told, by some of them that I would have to go back and talk to Health Canada and Indigenous Affairs. So that's one thing, and the second thing is that, so here we have Health Canada does not record data on these deaths, yet they pour millions of dollars into suicide prevention and mental health services. And so a lot of health advocates across the country find that really bizarre.
Martha, great work. Appreciate you digging into it and joining us here on the desk to talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
The Federal Minister of Indigenous Services announced funding today for a 24-hour safe space for youth in Winnipeg. The funding for Nadinaway was dedicated to the memory of Tina Fontaine. Jane Philpott will also be meeting with various organizations while in Winnipeg to discuss, among other things, child welfare, and she joins us now. For taking some time to join us today. It's been about 2 months since the emergency meeting that you hosted in Ottawa for Child and Family Services, Child Welfare. What can you tell us that you've seen any positives come out of that meeting?
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, I would say that we've seen some very positive results of that meeting. It was an incredible meeting that brought together First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders from across the country to address the issue of the severe overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the child welfare system in this country. So it certainly did a lot in terms of raising awareness. One of the direct results actually has to do with why I'm here in Winnipeg today. The Métis Nation, for example, decided that they wanted to host a specific summit on the issue of Métis children in care, and so they're spending 3 days now looking at policy changes that could be implemented and looking at some best practices for family reunification and prevention. I think the other work that I would say has been really positive is that we were able to, for instance, acknowledge that the federal government is going to fully comply with every single order of the Human Rights Tribunal, and we're able to announce to First Nations child welfare agencies that we will fund the actual costs of prevention of child apprehension, and in fact do that going back a couple of years. And then we were able to get $1.4 billion in the most recent federal budget to support First Nations child welfare agencies and also to support communities on trying to reunify families and ideally prevent children from being apprehended in the first place.
Minister, do you think enough's been done in that 2 months since the so-called emergency meeting?
Well, you can never do enough fast enough in circumstances like this. There are tens of thousands of Indigenous children who are separated from their families and culture across the country. It's terrible that we are in these circumstances that we're in, but we need to figure out how quickly we can do better. I had the opportunity last night to meet with a huge number of families that are associated with the First Nations Family Advocate Office here in Winnipeg. They have brought 270 children back home, children that were previously in care, and they believe in the next number of months they're going to be able to bring another 300 children back home. So I wish it could all happen overnight, that families could be reunified, but the good news is that progress is really being made.
Minister, a lot of meetings for you tomorrow with many of the organizations here in Winnipeg that represents First Nations in Manitoba. What can you tell us about those meetings?
Well, we have a lot of meetings to look forward to. One of them that I'd be happy to share with you is that we're meeting with the leaders of MKO, First Nations in the northern parts of Manitoba, and talking to them about health transformation. We'll be signing an agreement with them to work towards the possibility of an MKO health authority, a First Nations health authority, because we believe, and this is based on evidence from places like British Columbia, where there is a BC First Nations health authority, that actually when First Nations are in the driver's seat working together to design, control, manage, and deliver health systems for their own people, that the outcomes are far, far better. People get better care, better value for money, and address those health outcomes. So that's something we're pretty excited about. I'll be with Grand Chief Sheila North and signing that agreement and then putting steps in place to go from there.
Minister, you'll also be meeting, I guess, with some of the chiefs that represent Treaty 1, and we're seeing stories about Capion Barracks again. Are you able to tell us about any movement on that file?
I understand that there is work underway on that those issues are being addressed. It's being dealt with, as you know, by another department, but I understand that there are ongoing negotiations dealing with that matter.
Minister, appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
A group of girls from a flying community in Northern Ontario are seeing some of their dreams become a reality. That story's coming up after the break. Here's a look at the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, -17 for Fort Chipewyan. cloudy with a high of +2 in Edmonton and Red Deer, +4 in Medicine Hat. Over to BC, +9 in Penticton, Kamloops, Victoria, and nearly everywhere else. In northern BC, +4 in Prince George and Smithers. Sunny skies in much of the Yukon, however not in Whitehorse, where there is a high of 0. Over to NWT, -25 in Fort Resolution, 23 below in Yellowknife, -25 in Colville Lake as well, -28 in Paulatuck and Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, -29 in Baker Lake, 24 below in Cambridge Bay, -14 in Cape Dorset, -11 on Wednesday in Iqaluit. Welcome back. What started as a pipe dream became a reality for an all-girls hockey team. And it was all thanks to the generosity of many. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
This group of girls from Fort Hope First Nation had an exciting week in the nation's capital. On Friday, they competed in their first ever all-girls Pee-wee tournament.
I think they did amazing. They had a rough start, but they were able to get comfortable with the ice, and they were working together and talking to each other on the ice. And the best thing was seeing them is support each other, especially their goalie.
Rebecca Jerome is a teacher and a coach for the 16-member hockey team. She's been working with the Res girls since September to get here.
First we were playing just in the gym, doing ball hockey. And then in January, when our ice froze over, we were able to go on the ice, and we've been playing on the ice since January.
Allison Norman is also a teacher in the remote fly-in community and the team's general manager. She said it was an eye-opening week for the girls.
For a lot of these girls, it's the first time they've left maybe the community or they've left the Thunder Bay area, and it's a real chance for them to, to be proud of who they are and to explore a new city.
It wasn't just about hockey. They had the chance to tour Canada's capital, the Museum of History, Parliament Hill. Norman says it took a lot to bring them here. They started fundraising through businesses and corporations, and when word got out, the generosity flowed.
We had some money donated from actually the city of Markham for their jerseys. We've had even personal donations of quilts made for the girls, backpacks. We've had other equipment, food donations, and one of very generous donations from Katie and Steve Koopman. They're from the Kingston area. They saw the story and really wanted to help out.
Steve and Katie Koopman launched a GoFundMe page to help take the team to a Sens game while in Ottawa. Steve Koopman says the page exceeded their expectations.
Really, we originally were looking at $3,000, then we went to $5,000, $6,000, and now in total we're close to $10,000 raised. So aside from seeing the hockey game, we're already trying to get them a little bit of a jump towards next year's tournament, or even assisting with equipment in the future.
According to Coach Jerome, as the weather gets warmer, the plan is to teach the girls how to play field hockey. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Great story. Congrats to the girls. That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. Stick around. An all-new episode of The Laughing Drum with Tim Fontaine is just minutes away. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.